Yeah, so Blazor Server, it's certainly an interesting hosting model, but as Gary said, the whole disconnected thing just makes it kind of unappealing. And the .NET Core server requirement makes it challenging with Sitecore at the moment. So let's take a look at how Blazor WebAssembly works. And as its name implies, Blazor WebAssembly uses WebAssembly to do its rendering. So WebAssembly is a new open standard. It's basically a new portable execution format that allows you to run almost any language in the browser at native speed. So you can see there are a lot of languages popping up here on the screen. Each one of these right now has some kind of WebAssembly support. Might be kind of prototype support, or it could be more mature like with C# and Blazor. But it's really exciting because, as Gary has mentioned, for us Sitecore developers, most of us are primary backend developers really comfortable with C#. Moving to JavaScript, it's kind of a bit of a pain to pick up and all the tooling and everything, but we're already productive in these backend languages. So WebAssembly lets us kind of hit the ground running with front-end development and be productive right away. Now, I want to clear up one kind of misconception. I've kind of talked to some people about WebAssembly and how it works. WebAssembly doesn't sit on top of JavaScript, and WebAssembly isn't taking C# and compiling it down to JavaScript. It's a completely separate assembly language. It's a completely separate execution format. So you're not like running JavaScript through C#. It's a bit different, but it runs in the same sandbox in the browser that JavaScript does. The cool thing about WebAssembly is that it's already got major support. So all the latest versions of Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Edge, they all support WebAssembly right now. So it's possible to use it in those. And I'm also happy to report that Internet Explorer has no support whatsoever. So I think that, yeah. Microsoft, unfortunately, actually supported it earlier this year and made the right decision to cut support. So we're glad to see that. Good riddance. Blazor WebAssembly has got some pretty good benefits that, again, make it appealing for Sitecore and JSS development. The first being that it's a familiar rendering model. So I don't have architecture diagrams up here like Gary showed for Blazor Server because I don't really think we need to talk about it. I mean, all of your component code is running completely in the browser through WebAssembly. Since it's running in the client and running in the browser, you've got full offline support. So you can develop your applications in a way that they don't need a server connection past that initial load, which is really appealing. And it's nice for our blog sites or just a typical website, right, where you should be able to continue reading the content once you lose your cell phone signal. So that's a nice thing. And again, that's made possible because it's running entirely client-side. And since it's entirely client-side, you can host it anywhere. If you wanted to host it on Apache or Nginx, you could do that. Netlify would be possible. But even nearer and dearer to our hearts is hosting it on a SitecoreSYM or CD, because with Blazor WebAssembly, all that you're doing is hosting some bootstrapping code for Mono, the .NET Core runtime, and then your DLLs for your application. So this makes it possible to run Blazor WebAssembly from Sitecore servers. But not everything is rosy. There's got to be downsides to this new model. First of all, it's still under construction. So with .NET Core 3.0, that release in September, and Blazor Server's got a full release with that, as Gary mentioned. It's production ready, but Blazor WebAssembly is still in development and won't see a full release until, I think, May of 2020. So if you want to get started with WebAssembly right now, you can expect that the APIs probably aren't very mature and that they're going to change between now and then. Next, you're limited to browser capabilities. So, I mean, I just kind of put this here as a contrast to Blazor Server. But I don't really think that this is that big of a deal because we're used to being limited to browser capabilities with web development today anyways. It's just more of a compare and contrast part. But what is a big deal, pun intended, is the huge download size of Blazor WebAssembly bundles. So whenever you start a new JSS application, be that with Angular, React, or Vue, that new application comes with a boilerplate style guide website. Okay? With React and Vue, that boilerplate style guide website is 470 kilobytes. That same site rebuilt on WebAssembly is 9.5 megabytes. Right? That's a pretty large download size. Part of that is because you actually have to download the .NET Core runtime, so you've got access to those APIs. But you know, maybe this isn't that big of a deal whenever you've got websites going out there with 100 megabyte videos on their homepage hero image. Or potentially we could get that stuff hosted on a CDN, so it's not that big of an impact. Next, debugging is pretty bad right now. So Microsoft, to be fair, is working on the debugging experience so that you can do remote debugging between Visual Studio and Chrome or Edge, but it's not really there right now. And if you decide to go dive into Blazor WebAssembly, you're going to get burned by this pretty quickly. It's really bad, comes down to a lot of console.writeline statements, et cetera, and it's just not fun. So that's Blazor WebAssembly, upsides and downsides. We think the upsides outweigh the downsides and make this a better fit for Sitecore and JSS development.